Setting up a Wi-Fi LAN the easy way. Part 1 of 2, the parts with wires. In this movie, I'll show you how to set up a Wi-Fi LAN in your home or small office based on a single residential gateway box containing an appropriate broadband modem, router, Ethernet switch, and wireless access point. A single box solution like this may not be available to you. As a general rule, your Internet Service Provider, ISP, will provide all of the equipment you'll need to install. Sometimes 2 separate boxes are provided, and in that case the process will be slightly different, but all of the principles are the same. And you should be able to use this movie for guidance with a little customized interpretation. If you've purchased your own LAN equipment from a technology retailer, or if you've retained your own equipment from a former ISP, you're more likely to have 2 or 3 separate boxes, and you'll need to interconnect them to get the same basic functionality that's described here. That's not difficult, but there are some details you should know about. You can learn those details from other clips available within the wireless networking section at AskMisterWizard.com. And with that information, you can wire up your multiple box equipment to behave exactly like the single box solution that we'll be discussing. So, with that introduction behind us, let's get started, based on the assumption that you can arrange for some kind of broadband internet connection from a local internet service provider, and that you've obtained all of the necessary Wi-Fi hardware, broadband modem, router, Ethernet switch, and wireless access point in a single box, or in a combination of boxes that are appropriately wired in series to behave like a single box. When we talk about that equipment as a single, all-inclusive entity, we'll continue to use the term wireless residential gateway. First, we'll need to acknowledge that your wireless network won't be entirely wireless. It is commonplace to need some wires. For example, your internet service provider will almost certainly string some kind of cable from their nearest facility into your home. You will also need to use one or more wires to connect that service to a connector leading to the broadband modem portion of your wireless residential gateway. All of the popular wireless residential gateways support the option to connect one or more computers with an Ethernet cable, and most people find that a wired cable gives better performance and is convenient for computers located nearby. During the initial setup, you'll need to use a wired Ethernet cable to connect the first of your computers, but you will be able to eliminate that wired cable afterward if you prefer to keep that computer untethered. Most network equipment manufacturers try to provide some kind of semi-automated process for neophytes, described in prominent Start Here documents or CD-ROMs, and you might be well served to attempt their sequence. Usually they expect you to install special software on your Windows or Macintosh computer. If that works for you, fine. But every manufacturer's process is different, and some of them aren't very well thought out. Some of them are incompatible with certain internet service providers, or with obscure operating systems, or with certain routers. Experts are painfully aware of these shortcomings, so they generally avoid the special customized software and newbie procedures, preferring instead to follow correct principles, as I'm covering them in this movie. In the long run, this turns out to be the easy way. Modern operating systems, including Linux, Microsoft Windows, and Apple's OS X, provide full support for wireless internet access, so you shouldn't need to install any specialized software from your internet service provider. First off, you'll need to arrange for internet service from an internet service provider or ISP. In most domestic situations nowadays, your own neighbors will provide the best source of information on this subject. Ask them if they have internet access and if they're happy with it. They will probably tell you how much they're paying for the service, usually a monthly bill, and how fast and reliable their own experience has been. Ask several neighbors and choose the best deal you can find. In some neighborhoods, the best technology relies on the same coaxial cable that brings cable TV services. This is generally known as cable internet service. In other neighborhoods, the best deal comes from the local telephone company and is known as DSL. Your distance from a local telephone switching station will determine whether DSL service is faster than cable service. In either case, your ISP will provide service through some kind of connector in one or more of your walls. Generally, they will make their services available through your existing telephone or cable TV connectors. Choose one that's in a convenient place, where you have nearby electrical power and some kind of shelf, table, or desk that will allow access to computer and network equipment and perhaps a jumble of wires as your network grows. Because of the limited range of Wi-Fi radio transmission, it's generally best to choose a location near the middle of your home for best coverage. A DSL connection comes in through a standard telephone connector, which looks like this. DSL technology also requires that you insert small, inexpensive DSL filters in series with your DSL residential gateway device and with all of your other non-DSL telephone equipment. That's everything you're already using, like your phones, answering machine, and burglar alarm, to prevent them from interfering with your DSL services. By this means, your ISP is able to share your telephone line with your existing telephone services. Your ISP should provide several of these DSL filters for your use, and you can buy more from any electronic supply store like Radio Shack. If you forget to install one of these, your DSL services will probably fail whenever you operate the associated telephone device. Cable internet service usually comes in through a standard cable TV connector, which looks like this. Usually, your ISP will also offer to provide you with the appropriate wireless residential gateway hardware that we've already mentioned. Sometimes they will provide this equipment as a free perk to secure your business. Sometimes they sell it to you, and sometimes the arrangement is more of a lease or rental situation. You may be forced to pay a little extra for a gateway device that includes wireless technology. And for our purposes in this movie, we're going to assume that your hardware has that capability in addition to wired Ethernet, and that's the usual arrangement. Your ISP may also provide you with username and password information that you will need later when you are configuring your gateway hardware. Sometimes this is not necessary, but if it is necessary, your ISP will make a point of delivering it, and you should write it down. Make sure your notes clearly associate this username and password with your internet service provider, because later on you'll find that your wireless residential gateway hardware will need another username and another password, and you won't want to get them mixed up. Your gateway hardware will have several connectors. This will include some facility for connecting electrical power, and I'm sure you already know how to handle that. It's usually best to connect that one up last, so don't hook it up to power yet. One of the other cables will be labeled DSL, cable, internet, WAN, wide area network, upstream, or external. That connector must be compatible with the broadband internet technology you are using, and your ISP should provide a short wire to make the associated interconnection leading to the broadband modem section of your wireless residential gateway box. Hook that one up first, inserting the other end of that cable directly into the broadband wall socket. The gateway box will also have one or more connectors labeled LAN, local area network, downstream, or internal. When this equipment is intended for domestic use, it generally has 4 such connectors, but there may be more. Those connectors are compatible with Ethernet cables, and you'll use them to connect any of your computers that are near enough for a convenient wired connection. Of course, computers that use wireless or Wi-Fi technology won't need any such wire. To get things started, you should use one of these connectors and a short Ethernet cable to connect at least one computer, because the wired interface is a lot simpler than the wireless one in the beginning. Make that connection now, but leave that computer switched off. If you have more than one computer that can be conveniently hardwired with Ethernet cables, you will hook the others up later, after the basics are working. And if you need more Ethernet connectors, you can daisy chain one or more Ethernet hubs or switches, as described in other movies, in the Networking Fundamentals section at AskMisterWizard.com. All modern wireless residential gateways include a small, simple, internal web server, so you can communicate with them from your computer using any standard web browser. You can learn a lot more about using your web browser to communicate with your router and other network equipment from the AskMisterWizard.com movie entitled Managing Your Network Equipment with Your Web Browser, which is also available in our Networking Fundamentals section. But you won't be able to start that communication without some special information. Somewhere on the gateway box, or prominent within the accompanying documentation, you should see some technical information that you'll need in a few minutes so that one of your computers can communicate with it. Look for the default IP address, the administrative username, and the administrative password. Usually, the default IP address will be something like 192.168.0.1 or 192.168.1.1. Usually, the administrative username will be something like admin, and the administrative password is something simple like password or admin. Make a note of this information because you're going to need it in a few minutes. If there is no user manual or booklet accompanying your equipment, you might look for a CD-ROM containing this information. Or you might need to use somebody else's internet connection to go to the website of the manufacturer to find it. Yes, some manufacturers are so incompetent that they fail to provide this essential information without major efforts on your part. After hooking up the two network interface cables as described, you're ready to apply power to your wireless residential gateway device. After plugging into power, look for a power switch. If there is no power switch, it should turn on automatically when plugged in, and it's normal to leave this equipment on all the time. Your wireless residential gateway device will have some little lights to indicate status. Usually, there are separate LEDs for power, DSL or cable internet, internet activity, Ethernet LAN activity, and wireless or Wi-Fi activity. When you turn the box on, the associated power indicator should illuminate immediately. During the next minute or so, the other lights will flash in patterns with which you should eventually become familiar. Every vendor handles this situation differently, but in general, the patterns indicate activity. During the first few seconds, the equipment is automatically testing connections, and the LEDs should blink on and off several times. The first time you see this activity, you won't know what it means. Don't worry about that. Even experts have no way of knowing exactly what is normal for any given network device until they've watched it several times after a successful setup. If everything is wired correctly, within about 2 minutes the pattern should gradually simplify. The power indicator should remain on steadily. The DSL or cable indicator should remain on in a more or less steady pattern. The internet indicator should be on steadily, or at least it should be illuminated most of the time with just occasional flashes at random intervals. The Ethernet LAN indicator or indicators should remain off until you switch on the single computer that you've wired to your new gateway device. As long as the power indicators are on and the internet indicator shows some kind of activity, then you are fully prepared to take the next step. You will try to communicate with your gateway device from the computer that you've physically attached. Fire up that computer and let it boot up in the usual way. The Ethernet LAN indicator on your residential gateway device should flash whenever data is exchanged with any of the computers that are physically wired to the LAN connectors. It will probably flash several times when you fire up your PC. Modern computers automatically exchange brief bursts of data every few seconds, even when they are idle, so it's normal to see occasional flashes. If the pattern you see differs vastly from this, you may have a problem, and you should make notes so you can describe the situation to an expert willing to help. At this point, your computer has an IP address, and your new gateway device has an IP address, and they should not be the same, but they should be quite similar, so that they are both using the same IP subnet. If they aren't similar enough to be on the same IP subnet, then they won't find one another at the next step, so we need to pause a bit to get this detail straightened out. because we haven't yet communicated anything meaningful with the new residential gateway, we can't configure it. So if it's not on the same IP subnet with your PC, then we'll need to change the PC to the gateway's subnet. You can learn a lot more about IP addresses and subnets by watching other movies in the Networking Fundamentals section at AskMisterWizard.com, but for now, it's sufficient to assume that your IP subnet consists of the first 3 sections of your IP address, like this: 192.168.0 or 192.168.1. If your gateway device is on subnet 192.168.0, then you must configure your PC to be on subnet 192.168.0. And conversely, if the new gateway device is on subnet 192.168.1, then you must configure your PC for subnet 192.168.1, etc. Use your operating system's network configuration facilities to configure a static IP address from the appropriate subnet, avoiding the IP address in use by your gateway device. For example, if your gateway's default IP address is 192.168.0.1, then you might configure your PC for IP address 192.168.0.2. When you're asked for netmask, use 255.255.255.0. When you are asked for default gateway and DNS server, use the default IP address of your new wireless residential gateway device. On a Windows XP machine, this is done through the Control Panel, Network Connections, Local Area Connection 1 offerings. You can see exactly how to do this by exploring the movie entitled Configuring Your Internet Connection Part 2, Static IP Configuration. Once your PC's hardwired Ethernet interface has a unique IP address from the same subnet as your gateway's default IP address, you can fire up any standard internet-based browser application and attempt to access the gateway's web server. Enter the gateway's default IP address in your browser's address bar, as shown here. Within a few seconds, your new residential gateway device's web server should respond with a demand for authentication. You must prove that you know the gateway's default username and password that we discussed earlier. Once you're beyond that point, the gateway's web server will offer all sorts of options to you. Usually, there's a well-thought-out sequence of web links that will lead you, step by step, through the process of configuring your gateway equipment to access the Internet through your Internet service provider. And that should be your next task. Look for prominent links labeled Start Here or Setup Wizard and carefully follow their step-by-step instructions. If your ISP requires its own username and/or password, you'll be required to enter it, and your network gateway equipment will remember and reuse that information for you every time you need access. The process will try to figure out what kind of Internet service is connected, and if it needs help, you'll need to provide additional information from your ISP notes. Usually, you won't need to do anything but click on simple buttons labeled Next or Continue, because the default values are generally appropriate. Within a few minutes, as you work your way through this process, your gateway's web server should inform you that your Internet access is working, and you should find that the PC you have been using to communicate with that gateway device can also now communicate with other websites all over the worldwide Internet. Now that your gateway equipment is connecting your PC to the Internet, it's time to change the associated default password. If you forget to do this before you enable Wi-Fi, then somebody in your own neighborhood might be able to connect with it, reconfigure it, or get into all sorts of mischief with it. Look for prominent menu choices permitting you to change the password that's used to access the administrative functions of your wireless residential gateway. Usually these menu choices refer to words like administration or administrative access. Choose a password that cannot be found in any dictionary, because hackers have tools that automate the process of guessing with every dictionary word. The best passwords include several random-looking characters with letters, numbers, and punctuation. It's best not to use the same password that you use for other purposes. Make this one unique. Write down that password with its associated purpose and username. Store those notes in a safe place. Because my gateway device is located in a private, relatively secure area of my home, I usually write it down on a piece of paper that I tape to the underside. Once you've changed that administrative password, it's a good idea to exit from the administrative web page, restart your browser, and then go back to it. Your attempt to authenticate with the new password should confirm your success. You won't ever need that old password again, unless, due to some spectacular blunder, it ever becomes necessary to perform a factory reset. At this point, if you have other computers that you want to hardwire to your gateway device with Ethernet cables, you should be able to connect them successfully. Most modern Internet gateway devices support the well-known Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol services, so that your PCs will be automatically configured with appropriate IP addresses from the appropriate subnet if they are using DHCP in the usual way. You can learn a lot more about DHCP from the AskMisterWizard.com movie entitled Configuring Your Internet Connection Part 1, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, or DHCP. Once all of your hardwired PCs have Internet access, you're ready to tackle management of your wireless networking logic. We appreciate our many YouTube viewers. However, if you are trying to find our videos only on YouTube, you are missing out on a lot of our very best content. We have thousands of informative video clips like this one, and it can be difficult to find the others in proper sequence. On our site, these clips are also accompanied by related links, related text, still images, audio recordings, question and answer forums, and advertisements from carefully selected vendors that understand these issues and want to help with their products. Please join us there. We appreciate your support. From YouTube, it's easy to find our site. Just click on the prominent link at the beginning of YouTube's descriptive text. Thank you.